Lieutenant Commander Shelby took over Borg analysis 6 months ago. Captain Picard's culture is based on freedom and self-determination. And Data scolds Wesley Crusher on poker etiquette. Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Seventh Rule with Cirroc Lofton.
Hello, hello.
My name is Ryan T. Husk, and today we're doing a review of Star Trek The Next Generation, Season 3, Episode 26. Yep, that episode. It's finally here. The Best of Both Worlds, Part 1, written by Michael Piller, directed by Cliff Bull. This was June 16th, 1990. Where were you? We have a very special guest today. You know her from Picard Season 3 as Admiral Shelby, as well as Lieutenant Commander Shelby herself. It's Elizabeth Dennehy. How are you today, Elizabeth?
Good. How are you?
So good.
Great.
And thank you so much for hanging out with us. It is truly an honor. This is very, very exciting. I remember this episode from way back when, so I cannot wait to get into it. So let's not wait. First and foremost, can you just tell all of us, this is one of your first credits. Do you remember the audition process? Do you remember reading your sides and getting kind of an idea and thinking, I am so going to nail this one? What was that all about? Do you remember that?
Yes, it's okay. I have to do a little bit of a backstory leading up to this, and it's embarrassing. I'm a little bit ashamed. I was a sci-fi snob. I never had any interest in science fiction whatsoever. I went to an all-girls school on Long Island, New York, and let's just say that the people who were interested in the original series were not the cool kids.
Oh yeah.
Get the idea? An all-girl Catholic school, and the girls who were interested in Star Trek, the original series, were brilliant. They were the mathematicians. They were the people who were the president of the school. They were the scientists, but they were not cool. And of course, if you wanted to be cool, sci-fi meant that you were a nerd, And so we're talking like the 70s. I think that Comic-Con made being a sci-fi nerd cool. I think it was sort of that way up until Comic-Con. All of a sudden, everybody's going down to Comic-Con, and cosplay was like with really hot people. And it was like, wow, what's happening? But when I was growing up, it was not for me. My thing growing up was so funny. We were just talking about London, an Anglophile. I was into the Six Wives of Henry VIII, upstairs, downstairs, Merchant Ivory movies, Shakespeare. I was really into that kind of period stuff, and Brideshead Revisited was my jam. And so when I moved out to LA, and I was 28, I got that audition, just like I've had many, many, many auditions. It was just another audition, in other words, and a little bit, it's really embarrassing to admit that I was like, Star Trek? Really? Seriously? Okay, whatever. I was really an asshole. I was very full of myself and haughty, and it wasn't Shakespeare, so I kind of looked down my nose at it, even though Patrick Stewart is like huge Shakespearean. I know how I'm embarrassed. I really am ashamed to admit that. But having said that, I think that kind of disdain was right for Shelby, and that if I had the appropriate level of respect and intimidation for what it actually was, I don't think I would have been as right for the character as they saw something. So does that make any sense? I think that disdain that I had, that haughtiness, is Shelby. Just like, I don't care who you are. I don't care your status. I don't care your rank. I've got a problem to solve. Where's your problem to solve it? So
absolutely.
I remember just being kind of like, whatever about it, and going in there. And I remember seeing in the waiting room an actress who made me go, oh shit, I should have maybe looked at this a little bit. And it was Joanna Pakula, who had just made a huge splash in Gorky Park.
Okay.
So William, this is all before you were even born. Stuff I'm talking about before you were even born. Gorky Park, starring William Hurt, and coincidentally, my father. Joanna Pakula everybody was talking. She was on everybody's list, and she was in the waiting room. And I went, oh my God, this is a big deal. I had no idea. That brought me up short. I was like, "Ooh, God." So I remember the audition. I don't remember a callback, but there must have been a callback. Um, and yeah, I was really, really surprised to get it. And I remember reading the script for part one, not part two, but for part one, and just being like, okay, whatever. And I got on the set and was in the makeup trailer, and I met Jonathan Frakes, and I was like, oh, you're Riker. Oh, I wasn't sure if it was the baldy guy. Oh, you're Riker. Yeah. I know it sounds so clueless and disparaging, but before there was the internet where you could just look up
Yeah.
I couldn't go on YouTube and find old series to get brush up, get up to speed on it. That none of that existed. There was not even cell phones. So without that instant being able to research and get up to speed on things, like now my son, who's an actor, he auditions for The Bear, and it's like, all right, pull up the old episodes and get up to speed. Who is everybody? You couldn't do that back then. So I was clueless and just walked into the deep end without, having any idea of what I got myself into.
Wow.
So that's my memory of
Wow.
the very first part of like getting the job.
You don't look clueless on screen.
Nope.
On screen, you look professional and fantastic. You have a bravado about you that intimidates Riker to a degree. And this being early in your career, it's amazing that you're able to muster up this level of confidence to me, because it almost feels like your show when you walk on. What was what was it like working opposite Riker Jonathan Frakes, once you started filming?
So that confidence that you mentioned could be confidence, but it could also be absolute abject ignorance of just like, Star Trek, whatever, just totally like I said, if I was a fan, I think I would have been shitting my pants. I would have been like, oh my God, this is a huge thing. I've got to really learn my lines, and which that nervousness and desperation would have been anti Shelby. So in a way, it was confidence, but it was also just like, what are you talking about? What do you mean this is a big deal? Kind of just blind ignorance. So when I showed up on the set and I met Jonathan, he had worked with my father and knew him back in the early days. They did theater together in New York, so he was just like incredibly respectful. Could not have been lovelier. Had this huge trailer, and it was like, if you need anything, you could use my trailer, because
Wow.
I had a little dink one. Just was incredible, really sweet. And we were running lines and stuff like that. And he said, "You have absolutely no idea what's about to happen to you, what's in store for you. You talking about? What are you talking about? It's just a job." And I don't know where I got this, what could have played off as confidence, but it was absolute ignorance. I had only ever done at that point commercials, and I was on The Guiding Light. I was on a soap opera for
Nice.
a year, where I was a dressing room mate and best buddy with Michelle Forbes.
Nice.
What?
Yeah, she and I were on The Guiding Light together, and we shared a dressing room. And I was actually just talking to her on the phone yesterday for a long time. Best bud, like OG, we go way, way, way back. And so that was my experience on Star Trek. And I'm going to tell you a couple of stories that are really, really wake me up in a cold sweat, like cringe stories. So when I showed up on the set, and Jonathan knew me and he knew my dad, and he was so lovely. And when he said, "You have no idea what's going to happen," I didn't know what he was talking about. And of course, he was talking about conventions and the fanaticism and how people were really, really going to care about this. And I was just like, whatever, just like, whatever. I was so stupid. I was so clueless. So I was about to get my comeuppance, my big moment of, oh my God. The very first scene we shot was the ready room Projections suggest that a Borg ship like this one could continue to function effectively even if 78% of it were rendered inoperable. I will never forget that line for as long as I live.
Apparently.
Because I could
Wow.
not say it. I could not say it on the day. Could not get it out of my mouth. Then, like after the 5th time, and everybody in the show is like that, I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm going to be fired. I'm going to be fired. It was so embarrassing. That was my first scene, and I had a terrible
Wow.
time. I was talked about this on the Ready Room with Will Wheaton and Jonathan. Like, I crumbled and was just absolutely fell apart. And the more I tried, the worse it got. It was terrible. That was my first day. And I think nowadays they would have fired me. I don't think they spend time wasting time on people who don't deliver. So that was really.
I don't know about that. That was, you said 5 takes? Was it something
Yeah.
5 takes? That's not that many takes.
So we went on. At 5 takes was when I completely fell apart inside, like confidence gone out the window. It was probably more like 25 takes after that. It was bad.
Wow.
It was really,
Wow.
really bad. And I'll tell you, I'm going to get really into the weeds, and this is maybe more information than you even want to know.
Great.
So on a TV show and on film, when you have a single camera show, they have a camera and they you rehearse and you set your marks, hit your mark. This is where the lights are going to be. And you rehearse with everybody on the cast. And then you go back into the makeup and hair trailer and you get your hair and makeup done while they are lighting and marking the camera moves. So, and then when you get your hair finished and your makeup finished and the lights are all figured out, then you go back in and you shoot that scene. I did not know that. On the soap opera, you shot in order from the beginning depending on the set. And if you were a big star, they did your scenes on that set all in a row so that you could leave. And then if you were way down the food chain, you were there all day. So I had all day to learn my lines because I was only on the show for a year. I wasn't like a big established star. So I would learn all my lines on the day on the set because it would be 4 or 5 o'clock by the time they would get to my scenes.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was used to. And that's what I thought was going to happen. I didn't really, when they said, okay, we're ready for you. And I was like, what? We're ready to shoot that scene that we just rehearsed? Thinking that I had all this time to learn my lines. I was so stupid. And I was so happy that when they did the Blu-ray release, that Cliff Bowl and I did running commentary, and I got to tell him, I said, I was so mortified. And he said, why didn't you say something? And I said, I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know until that moment that we were going to shoot that scene right now that we just rehearsed. And I thought, oh, they just were figuring out where the place went. Now they're going to rehearse all the scenes in the whole episode. And then we're going to come back to that scene and shoot it. The haughtiness came back to bite me in the ass.
Wow.
Yeah.
That must have been so stressful. I'm getting stressed hearing about it when they're like, all right, we're ready for your scene. And you're like, whoa,
what?
I am not
but
ready
I thought
for
I
this
had
scene.
all that. Yeah. I had a heart attack. And of course, I was too embarrassed to tell anybody. So when my son went to college for theater at the DePaul University in Chicago, I was like, make sure people tell you how to read a call sheet. Make sure people tell you that you're going to rehearse and then shoot the scenes in order. And right out of school, his first job was on Chicago Med, and he was the entire episode. And I said, sit down. I have to tell you something really important. I told him that story. Because nobody tells you this stuff when you're in school. It's ridiculous. When you're a theater major, you think your whole life is going to be doing nonstop Shakespeare plays and, Moliere and, Death of a Salesman. And then you get hired by a TV show, and there's no, when the first time I heard Hit Your Mark, I had no idea what they were talking about. So.
Well, Elizabeth, can I tell you something? You've got all these stories about practically catastrophe, not knowing all of your lines, messing up the lines at first. But let me tell you something. Watching this show as a kid and watching all of the Star Trek series, Shelby is definitely a top 5 guest star, in my opinion, in all of the Star Trek series. For me, one of the most memorable Star Trek characters ever, with some of the best lines, and you left such a strong impression on me when I was first dipping my toes into Star Trek. This episode and your character did a huge amount in the way of getting me into that world of thinking, whoa, this is really good. One line specifically, maybe a top 5 or top 10 most memorable line to me when I was first watching it, and still to this day, was "You're in my way." I was like, man, this is good eating. I wanted to eat that line. It was so good, and you delivered it so well. I was so excited about this. So my question to you is, what was the reaction afterwards? Were you prepared for it? How quickly did you realize, whoa, this is a pretty big situation, especially because this was the final episode, and then people had to wait for 3 months, and they're like, you can't end here. What's going on? Did you get that reaction in the summer of 1990? Was it 20 years later at a convention? When was that?
Okay, so there's a lot there, what you just said. First of all, something that I don't think a lot of people realize is that we only had the first script. We didn't have the second script. When we shot part 1, we had no idea what was going to happen.
Wow.
No clue. We were waiting too, those 3 months. It wasn't until I was in New York that summer, and then I went back to LA. And because this was before the internet, where scripts had to be mailed to you and they were watermarked, and it was like, top secret, just crazy, crazy security. When Jonathan and I were talking about the relationship between these two characters, first of all, it was the first time they'd ever had a cliffhanger. One of the things that we talked about was we had no idea where this relationship was going to go. And we had no idea if they were going to end up falling in love with each other, or was I a Borg in disguise? We had no clue. And was I a villain or a hero? So you had to kind of play all of that all at once in case of any option that they chose. So all of those little smart smirks, like when I say, Data, scramble the phaser frequencies, keep them changing, and then Picard comes up and puts his hand on my shoulder, and I have that little smug, self-satisfied, all those little looks and all those little moments and all those little, is she a good person or is she not, was on purpose because we had no idea what it was going to turn into. Wow. And so what that allows you to do is play a 360-degree character of somebody who could have ulterior motives. What agenda is she working? But I think it made the audience lean in.
Mm-hmm.
Where is this going? I don't know how to feel about this person. And I'm trying to remember when it was aired. It was aired in the summer. Did part 1 air and then part 2? Of course, it was a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
I don't think I did any conventions in between. But my very first convention was in St. Louis, Missouri, and it was with George Takei, and I was scared to death. I was terrified. Not because of people thinking they didn't like my character. I was terrified because I thought that Star Trek fans would think I was an imposter and I didn't deserve the part because I wasn't a true fan of the medium, of the genre, that and that I would get on stage, and people did do this. People did say, so when you were on the Borg ship, what was your phaser frequency set at? And I was like, you tell me what it was set at. I have no idea. You know more than I do. I was afraid people were going to think I was an imposter and I didn't deserve. But what I was not prepared for was, oh, I hated you. You were such a bitch. The vitriol and the animosity was really scary and shocking. And people walking by my table, not wanting my autograph, like despise me. That was really shocking. And they would say, "You were such a bitch to Riker." And I would say, "But was I right? I was right." And that was 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago, 1990. Now I go to conventions and people are like, "I love you. You were such a strong female. You didn't care if people liked you or not. You really did the right thing and you stood up and you didn't care. You didn't try to make it seem like the man's idea." So look at how much things have changed in 30 years.
Totally.
30 years ago, you didn't have nevertheless, she persisted, right? People, how people have become pro-feminists overall. And that was sort of unheard of back then, that a woman would not care if she was liked or not, and would come in strong with these ideas, go in over your boss's head, do an end run around him. So, which brings me back to the original line. When we were shooting that, Jonathan and I, being very, very careful to be ambiguous enough that people would be guessing, where's this woman coming from? We purposely ran the scenes and they were very quiet. "You're in my way. I don't have to yell. I don't have to work hard. It's effortless. Yes, you're 6'4", whatever, how tall you are, but I am going to crush you. I am the boss." And so if I had been loud or if I had been yelly, it would have undermined the power and the strength. And she had a really strong inner power where it's effortless. Her power is effortless. And also, I have to tip the hat to Cliff Bole, who gave me one of the best acting notes I've ever received in my life. And I said that to him on the Blu-ray. When we were, I think it was that scene, all you knew how to do is play it safe. I suppose that's why someone like you sits in the shadow of a great man, passing up one command after another. When we were doing that scene, Jonathan, who is much taller than me, he's really tall. He's like 6'5". He's very tall. I'm 5'6". And what Cliff said was that I was doing the scene and I was looking up at him, and he said, "It makes you look like a little kid." He said, "So I want you to plant your feet firmly on the ground, root yourself, and look straight ahead as if you're looking at him directly in the eye." And I did that, and all of a sudden, I found the whole character with that note. I found exactly who she was. That was a brilliant, brilliant note, because when you look up at somebody on camera, it is a very weak position. Whereas if you look them square in the eye, even though I couldn't do that, that I'm indebted to him for forever for that. So that was a very long answer, but there was a lot in that moment, a lot of preparation, a lot of thought went into that moment. And the reaction to it, like you brought up, was off-putting at first, but really delightful to see how, and I meet kids, I meet 13 and 14-year-old girls who see her as a role model. That was happening 30 years ago when I would go to conventions. So I'm very glad that you brought that up. It's really, the world, it changes slowly, very slowly, but I do think things are getting better.
You led the way.
You led the way. Yeah, you did. You're one of the people that paved the way for this kind of a strong female character that we, that it took society a while to catch up to, but you were not afraid to make those choices. Something that we've talked with the Nana visitor and her character about, having to kind of face that same criticism because people didn't want to see a strong female character. And so they called you a bitch, or they said you were, off-putting for whatever reason, for those kinds of reasons. But thank God we've gotten to a place where seeing somebody who's ambitious, somebody who's smart and confident and knows what they want and knows what they're about can find support. I also want to credit you for the way you said that line too. I wrote it down in my notes. "You're in my way." It was so so goal oriented, because um, I watch boxers now and they talk about they're up for a big fight and they say, well, it's not about the person that I'm fighting, whether I like them or dislike them. They're in my way for
Yep.
whatever goal I want to accomplish. So it's just a matter of mathematics. I want to say to you, you seem to have like almost a perfect memory of your lines, because you are snapping and recalling these lines like as if you just read the script today. And I want to ask you, uh, the ability to grasp Star Trek techno-babble, setting your frequencies on this, and you mentioned 78% of the field and this and that. I mean, these are abstract concepts that we're not really scientifically able to grasp, but the way you say it with such confidence, as if you know what you're talking about, is something we always commend on this show. The grasp of Star Trek techno-babble. What was it that helped you master this particular this ability to do the techno babble and kind of run through it with such kind of you know authority?
Well, first of all, I don't remember lines from any other TV show I ever did. Uh,
That's
I don't have a Rolodex. You don't even know what a Rolodex. I don't have a computer in my brain that has. I don't. But I'm helped by the fact that I have been doing conventions and talking about the show up for 30 years, a lot, and so that helps. But it's true that those lines the one that I couldn't remember, I will never forget now because it took up so much real estate in my brain. But there's another line that took me hours and hours and hours to learn. So first I must preface this by saying, after that disastrous first day, I went home and I learned all of the lines for the entire episode in my bones. And there's a difference between learning lines enough to get by the day, through the day, but to know them in your bones so that you never ever forget them and you cannot say them wrong. That's a whole different thing. First of all, I've always had a facility for learning lines, and I thank the guiding light for that, having to learn 40 pages a night. But Star Trek is really interesting. There's another line that took me so long to learn, which was separate the saucer section, assign a skeleton crew to create a diversion. Not that long, right?
Mm-mm.
But it was so hard to get the muscles in my mouth to move in the right direction, the muscle memory. And then what finally happened was I had to picture it, separate the saucer section, right? Separate it from the ship, from the Enterprise. Assign a skeleton crew to create a diversion. It actually makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So when I pictured the movie in my mind of what I was saying, it then made sense, made logical sense, and was much, much easier to remember.
But these are tongue twisters too, though. Assign a skeleton group, like that's
saucer
assign,
section. Yeah, totally.
Yes.
Separate the saucer section. Try that.
Well, we heard you say it like 10 times, so we can do it now. But
but definitely a tongue twister. I would give you that 100%.
There's a trick. If you have a line with a lot of S sounds, what I learned was you have to say each word separately from each other. Separate the saucer section. Assign a skeleton crew to create a diversion. Every single word stands completely on its own. When I talked about the muscle memory, then once I was able to say the words in the correct order without separate without that, then it was faster and faster and faster. It was all muscle memory, and it was just like learning a musical passage. If you were playing an instrument, you go over and over and over and over again, something that's really difficult so that your fingers are always going in the right direction. It was exactly, I don't play an instrument, but this is what I'm assuming. I have I've learned really difficult passages. It was, it took hours and hours and hours to get it that casual, to make it sound, I don't know how Brent Spiner did it, but this was the way I did it. And Brent and and
LeVar.
LeVar. Oh my God, their brains. I was just like, oh my God, how do you do that? I only had to learn 2 scripts. Yeah, so that it's very interesting that you brought that up. There's the intention aspect of that actually makes sense. Separate the saucer section, assign a skeleton to crew to create a diversion. But then there's the technical aspect, which is every word separate on its own. And then when you get the lips moving in the right way, you can go faster. But it was crazy.
You know, that's really interesting that you say that, because, and we only have you for a minute left here, but it leads into exactly what I want to bring up, because the person that I heard doing the S's and really enunciating the words very clearly, more than anybody I've ever heard besides, or in that regard, is somebody by the name of Avery Brooks. I would notice it and I would study it. I'd say he really separates those words, especially when there's an S sound leading into an SH or something. He wants to make it clear what he's saying. And everybody knows Avery Brooks was Captain Sisko, played Cirroc's dad, the man over Cirroc's shoulder, for 7 years. The premise of Star Trek Deep Space Nine was created from this episode that we just saw, because Admiral Hansen says we're moving to intercept the Borg at Wolf 359. Star Trek Deep Space Nine in January of 1993 starts off with the Battle of Wolf 359, where Cirroc loses his mother, Captain Sisko, Commander Sisko at the time, loses his wife, and that sets the premise for the entire 7 years of Star Trek. So we'll definitely be covering that a little bit more in the second segment. Yeah.
Avery Brooks, theater actor, Shakespearean, which is why he had the skills and the technique to be able to get the words out and make it sound like this is the way we talk.
Amazing.
Yes, absolutely.
So, Elizabeth,
I think, I want to say you did a fantastic job in this episode. No, I want to give you your flowers. Excellent job. I really enjoyed this episode. Loved your performance in this episode. I said, finally, Riker has met his match.
Yeah.
I love the moment too at the end or towards the end of this episode, where you tell Riker he can't go on the away mission because he's too important to the bridge. And he's basically like, those are my orders, and Troy has to step in, and say, actually,
appropriate.
She used the word inappropriate. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And
so it was such a great match.
I love to remind people that Riker says in the episode, she reminds me of me. I used to be like that. I miss this thing about me, right? So he doesn't hate me. He doesn't despise me. No. He has admiration.
He loves it. Finally, a match for Riker. It was so good. And once again, like you mentioned about the leaving it ambivalent and not really knowing where we're going to go, I have that exact feeling. I don't know where. I haven't seen the second episode that follows this one up. I don't know where this is going to go. For all No,
that's what the beauty of this one. Cirroc is watching The Next Generation for the first time ever. I'm actually wearing my Sisko family shirt in honor of this episode launching Deep Space Nine. There's Cirroc.
Yeah.
Avery.
Wow.
So this is a lot of fun for us.
I'm just like, whoa, what's going to happen here? There's a lot going on.
So spoilers. Did I do any spoilers?
No, you didn't do any spoilers. It was perfect. It was perfect.
And we're going to make Cirroc wait all summer long.
I'm going to have to wait. No, this is perfect. I've heard so much build up to this episode. I mean, I've heard the title of this episode mentioned, 100 times. People mentioning this amongst the great episodes of Star Trek. And it's been a pleasure to talk with you about your experience in this episode, to watch you perform in this episode, and really pave the way for what would become something we see a lot of, which is strong female leads characters in Star Trek. It actually becomes known for that at some point, and I would dare to say that you're one of the first to do that. So, just pleasure, absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, Elizabeth, we absolutely cannot thank you enough. This has been such an honor. I never would have thought 30 years ago or whatever it was that I would have you and right in front of me to where I can talk with you and say, whoa, you delivered those lines so beautifully, but you really did. We truly appreciate you, your work, and you taking the time today to hang out with us and talk with us and our listeners and viewers. So thank you very much, Elizabeth. You are amazing.
Maybe I'll see you in Chicago.
Yes.
Yeah.
And everybody at home, stick around. Let us know in the comments below how amazing you think Elizabeth is. And if you agree, top 5 guest star ever in Star Trek. We will be right back on The Seventh Rule. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to The Seventh Rule with Cirroc Lofton.
Hello, hello.
Best of Both Worlds Part 1 leads directly into Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Here are the trivioids of the week. Commander Shelby took over Borg analysis 6 months ago. Admiral Hansen passes on poker night. When Commander Shelby came over to tactical, every admiral's uncle had to take on this Borg's business. Commander Riker is offered the captaincy of the USS Melbourne. Data scolds Wesley on poker etiquette. Wesley Crusher folds with 3 jacks. There's no evidence of avifaunal or crawling vermicular life forms on Joray 4. I didn't put that one at the top because I knew I was going to get it. Seasoned is a horrible thing to say to a man. Great line. Captain Picard is being hailed by name. It's a tradition for a captain to tour his ship before battle. Nelson toured the HMS Victory before Trafalgar. Picard tells Worf to fire at will, which was rude to Riker. Captain Picard's culture is based on freedom and self-determination. All right. So this is so cool to see the genesis of Deep Space Nine. Also, this is only the second time we see the Borg. So this episode is huge because it's like when the Borg hits home and, you know, the seeds of Deep Space Nine. So I've been waiting forever, and our fans and supporters have been waiting forever for you to see this episode. Cirroc, please tell me you're at the edge of your seat and you like this episode.
Yeah. You know, I felt a certain type of way when I heard Wolf 359.
Yes.
As soon as I heard it, I felt, I was like, oh, this is going to be that episode. And that's what this is about. So, yeah, I was like instantly kind of emotional without even seeing anything really go down yet. Just the fact that I heard that name. And then, of course, we see Picard get Borgified in this episode too. So I was like, holy crap, this is where it all begins. It made me really kind of appreciate that Michael Piller gave us this Borg, you know, and Michael Piller also subsequently gives us Deep Space Nine, right? So it's really all of this is kind of Michael Piller's, you know, creation to some degree, I would say. And it was just great to watch. Seeing Riker have some insecurities about his own career advancements and you know where he stands. That was great to see. A little callback to the poker, which we know was something that Melinda, I think it was Melinda Snodgrass that gave us the poker.
Yep.
So another kind of callback on something that becomes part of the show. And then, just in general, I felt like this was a very tension-filled episode where it didn't really necessarily require like the imminent threat of another ship or of an attack, but just the tension in the episode with
Yeah.
Shelby's character with Riker. Um, I felt the heightened sense of it. So that's what kept the story kind of moving for me, was this heightened sense of tension, what was going to happen, kind of lurking around the corner of every scene. So
Hmm.
uh, definitely interesting for me.
There's so many things I want to throw at you with this review. One is the tension, like you mentioned, starts off in the first second with the musical score. Like right when the episode opens up, the music tells you, don't get comfortable. It doesn't start off with, oh, they're playing water polo and something, and then red alert, now get serious. It starts off as serious and
Mm-hmm.
stressful from the get-go. And I thought the music was great throughout. I kept noticing it. Music, outstanding, A+. Also, a couple funny moments. I remember at a Star Trek convention in Las Vegas, by Creation Entertainment, of course, LeVar Burton was being interviewed, and they said, what's the most important thing to your character? Or some kind of question like that. He said 2 words, barrel roll. And he gets out and he does an impression of himself doing the barrel roll in this episode. He's like, get out, we got a coolant leak or something like that. And he does this thing and he gets on the floor of the stage and actually rolls and dirties up his beautiful clothes. And it was just so memorable. So when I see this, I picture him 30 years later doing that. I also thought there were so many great moments of camaraderie as well. At this point, 3 seasons in, Picard trusts Riker. Picard asks Riker, what's your assessment? Does she have your full confidence? He also, when Riker says, well, she's a little too whatever, and Picard goes, like he's playful with him. He does the little tisk, tisk, tisk. That sounds like, a young lieutenant commander I took. There's playfulness, there's trust there. And lastly, another funny moment was, and this is just to me, I guess, but when Shelby's telling Data, hey, change the whatevers and shoot the lasers at them, and I'm less technical than Geordi. And then she's standing up there with Wes and Data, and Picard comes up to her, and he kind of, I never noticed it before. He kind of taps her on the shoulder and kind of gives like a back the fuck up. It kind of looked like she's great. She's like, I'm tough. I'm in it. And he kind of leans in and goes like, back up, young lady. It's just the whole thing was just beautiful and nuanced, and all the looks, the camaraderie, the tension, the music. Perfectly executed episode.
Yeah, and drama doesn't need to be like two people yelling at each other. Drama is situational sometimes, and sometimes it's done in unspoken. For example, the drama when Riker shows up at the transporter room, and he tells O'Brien, "Whoa, I think they're late. Where are they? Where's Data and Shelby? They're late." And he says, "They left an hour ago. What are you talking about?" Like he thought you knew that. Like I thought you knew. I thought that was the plan. So that drama was already created just by like that, by one person being there an hour earlier and showing up earlier and going ahead without them. That created enough drama, right?
Yeah.
And then love the way Riker kind of shows up. You see him with the angry face when he does get there, and then he says, let's take a walk and talk, because I don't want to excoriate you in front of everybody else. I want to do this at a personal level, one-on-one. Let's take a walk over here. And that's when she initially like, hey, I didn't think it was a problem. Like, just perfectly sensing the moment, sensing that Riker was feeling some type of way, automatically starts to defend, right? And say, hey, look, I already knew this was going to, there's a storm coming. The window was smaller. Data doesn't need to sleep. The little moments like that create a great drama for me in this episode. The whole Shelby's already in Picard's office, You know, when Riker says, I'll run it by Picard. Oh, yeah, thanks for letting me know. I'll run it by him. And by the time he goes to run it by him, she's already sitting there. That's great drama, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, what the hell? You're going over my head. So I think that's what this episode did very well. I want to also say the music, too. I wrote down from the beginning, just kept me engaged. It was so eerie. It was so suspicious. It was like, you're not going to feel comfortable. You're not going to relax. You don't get the cozy little treat jingle music sometimes that we get in these episodes, right? This is going to be all edge of your seat, eerie, kind of, almost almost on the border of horror, almost like a horror film kind of eerie music.
Because we do have elements of that, and towards the end of this. And by the way, I do have a very quick and tiny nitpick. When Riker and Geordi show up and he says, where's Shelby and Data? They're late. I'm like, bro, if you just show up to something and say they're late, that means you're late. If that very second you arrive, you say, if they're not here, that means they're late. That means you are currently late. You arrived late. So, I mean, I'm not pointing fingers, Riker. I'm just saying, if you're mad at her for not being there and you literally just walked in. Anyway, that's just funny. But I thought that the writing was unbelievable. I agree. When he walks in on Shelby and Picard and he kind of starts to say something and Picard says, yes, I completely agree with you, number one, but... And then he says, let's consider that a sec. It makes Picard such a great leader. This is one of those episodes where Picard is becoming a great leader. Picard and Riker's relationship is this beautiful thing. I mean, it's just really coming together here. But Cirroc, so we only have a few minutes left already. This episode review is flying by. When it ended, and there's just like, Picard's there. They're going for Earth. They want to destroy Earth. Riker says, Mr. Worf, fire. Knowing full well, Riker knows full well, this is it. We may be killing Captain Picard. This is our only chance to stop the Borg. How did you feel? Were you pissed when it said to be continued, or were you just clapping, or what was your feeling?
Well, I'm thankful that I don't have to wait a whole summer like you did when this aired. So now I can get back into this. Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine it being hell to sit there and have to wait. I felt like it was ironic, and that's also a sign of good writing, that the episode is about him accepting a captain's position at the USS Melbourne. But instead, it's really about him accepting the captain position on the Enterprise, right? So they tease us with that, but it's actually it is about him becoming the captain essentially in this episode. That's what I feel like this is. Riker is the captain, and that's one of the main storylines. So, it showed me that Riker is willing to do the same thing that Picard is willing to do, and that is weigh in all of the factors, understand the window of opportunities and how narrow those windows are, and willing to make a decisive action in order to save the greater good. So that's what it proved to me about Riker in that moment when he says fire. I love Picard. I want to save him, but I've got a greater good at stake, and I have to take into account that. So it's a tough decision, but it seems to me to be the right decision.
Speaking of tough decisions, it's time for the home run of the episode, Cirroc. Who gets the home run of today's episode?
Yeah. I'm going to say on screen, Elizabeth Dennehy gets the home run for this episode as Lieutenant Commander Shelby. one of the driving force behind introducing this storyline, giving us Borg expertise, but also just giving us a strong guest star that is able to challenge Riker, was able to establish authority in this episode. So that to me is a home run performance. And on the secondary market of home runs, I'm going to give it to Michael Piller. He wrote this episode. There's no co-writer on this episode, so this is something that I'm pretty sure emanates from his brain. So it's a Michael Piller creation. He gives us a great season ender and a cliffhanger. So a cliffhanger directed by Cliff. So it's a double Cliff. But yeah, that's going to be my home runs.
Yeah, I agree completely. Elizabeth Dennehy knocks it out of the park. One of the most memorable characters ever in the history of Star Trek for me. Also, the writing. Clearly, this is a gem. This is a written gem. The actors nailed it, but actors can only do so much. This has to be beautifully written, and it was. Also, got to give it to the scoring as well. Who's that? Alexander Courage or Ron Jones? Looks like Ron Jones. Amazing work with the music, as mentioned. And also, we'd like to give a very special thanks to Homer Frizzell, Dr. Anne-Marie Siegel, Eve England out in Wales. Let's see if she poo-poos this episode. Doubt it. Yvette Blackman, Tom, TJ Jackson, Bay out Missouri, Titus Muller, Dr. Muhammad Noor, Tierney C. Diekman, Anil O. Palat, Joe Balsarati, Mike Gu, Dr. Stephanie Baker, Carrie Schwent, Faith Howell, Edward Foltz, My Life from Tokyo, The Matt Boardman, Chris McGee, Justin Weir, Jake Barrett, Henry Unger, Allison Leach High, Julie Manisfee, Greg K. Wickstrom out in Hawaii, Jed Thompson, Dr. Susan V. Gruner, Glenn Iverson, Dave Gregory, Tim Baum, Chris Sternett, Chuck A., Joanna Yunker, Amiram Misne, Nora Vega, Ed Jarrett, Steve Case, a.k.a. Joe Bugbuster, and, of course, Jason Okun. All right, everybody, thanks very much for hanging out with us. We've got the free-for-all up next. Stick around. We will be right back on The Seventh Rule. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to The Seventh Rule with Cirroc, Lofton. This is the free-for-all with Malissa Longo.
Hello.
We've got Jason M. Okun here. Interesting background. I don't know what's going on there. Greg Kenzo is out in Hawaii, probably. Eve England is out in Wales. Allison Leach Hyde is traveling around southwestern United States in an Amtrak. Wow, everybody's traveling. Anil O. Palat, you guys, is in Albania right now.
So cool.
Yeah. Carrie Schwent's got a giant Borg behind her. Don't look. The Dark Lord, Chris McGee, is here. Let's see if he got all of the some kinds of or some sorts of. And Matt Boardman will agree when we say the VFX in this episode were amazing.
Yes, sir.
Here we go. Jake Sisko guesses the IMDb score.
I'm going to say this episode is a 9. A 9.
Wow. Does anybody else have any guesses that doesn't already know?
9-2?
Yeah, I was guessing it's probably a 9.
Are we doing closest without going over? I don't want to be like, I don't want to be.
Greg, you get the car. You get the car.
Okay.
You get the dinette set.
Come on down.
8.5.
8.5. Anybody else? 9.3.
Oh,
wow.
Jason, very close.
Yeah, very good, everybody.
You
very
get
good.
the car today.
I get the toy car. Oh my God, I have to pay taxes.
The toy.
Exactly. You have to sell it to pay the taxes.
All right. Did we get any non-appearance mentions today? I didn't hear any. What about some kinds of and some sorts of? I got 3. Let's see what they are.
Yeah.
Let's see if you guys agree. Riker says there's some sort of magnetometric guided charges. 1. Chris says, well, that's 1. O'Brien says some kind of interference. Blimey. And then Data says some kind of power wave conduit. Is that all of them?
There's another one.
Yeah,
There's
Shelby.
another one.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Some
Melissa.
kind of defense strategy.
Mm,
Any
That's it.
Yeah,
Right.
that's a good one. Yeah.
very good. All right. Let's
Yeah.
get things rolling here. Malissa Longo, will you please get us started on the right track? Get it, Allison?
Oh my gosh. Well, I have to say there's so much to say about this episode. It is rich with a lot of stuff. First, I learned a little bit of trivia that I thought was amazing. Wolf 359 is a real star. It's a red dwarf,
Cool.
and it is at 7.8 light years from Earth, and it's the 5th nearest star closest to our sun. So that's pretty rad. I thought that was pretty great. But I like this episode because it is also rich in relationships, relationship building, and looking at how certain people react differently to each other and how they may not get along, but it's a good look at how they work together and work to come to a solution together. And this was a great example of that. I love seeing Riker, particularly in this episode with Troy. I love seeing his relationship with Troy in this. And Shelby, I like how they combat each other and how she challenges him in certain ways that he, may not have been challenged before. And it shows me why he has not chosen to take the captain's chair yet. And that I agree with his choice of not taking the captain's chair yet, because he's still got work to do on the Enterprise, in my opinion, but that's up to him, not anybody else. I enjoyed seeing the relationship between Guinan and Picard. They're so good together. And when Counselor Troy tells Riker that he shouldn't go on the away mission, that was a hard thing to tell him, but she was the only one he was going to listen to in that moment. And I'm so glad that he was open to it and saw reason, because if Shelby had told him that, he would have been like, no. And if Data told him that, no. But Troy was the good instrument in that moment. And then Picard's, I'm not going to get to everything because there's so much good stuff in this. But I have to mention Picard's face when the Borg told him that he had been chosen to be their voice going forward, because he was perfectly still, but I felt everything, the fear and the helplessness of that moment that he was feeling. And he's like, I can't get out of this. How do I get out of this? And I was scared of the Borg in that moment. So excellent job from Patrick Stewart in that moment. Much more to talk about because, this episode was great.
And also, great impression of Riker, Melissa. Great job there. No. That was nailed it. Great stuff. Thanks, Melissa Longo. Jason M. Okun is here. He's going to tell us this is one of his favorite episodes of Star Trek ever.
Well, I mean, it certainly is. I think there's no argument that this is perhaps the signature episode of The Next Generation, and certainly by many accounts the one that put the show on the map and made people pay attention. So saying, whether you like it or don't like it doesn't really, cover the whole story. And, I wanted to see what actually makes this special, what makes this different from, Menage a Troy, for example. And yes, or frankly, the the ultimate episode of the second season, which is probably the nadir of the entire series. You sort of go from the low to the high. And, what's unique about this? I mean, first of all, it's a sequel, which doesn't happen very often. It's a sequel to Q Who. It's also a cliffhanger, which really Star Trek hasn't had before this. Then you have sort of interpersonal conflict, which is something that certainly was not present in the Next Generation. So it's something completely different. And if you look at this, I mean, it really is a Riker story, maybe even more than a Picard story, which is something maybe I didn't appreciate. And I've seen this many, many times. And I think, looking at it from the perspective of what happened in Picard season 3, where Riker's story is very high up and you do get to see, Frakes giving a performance. Actually, he's given something to do.
Right.
Which, elevates certainly everybody else around him, elevates his performance. So there's so many things to say here. I mean, there's one thing I was a little apprehensive about going back and looking at it, and I'll save that for later.
Ooh.
But, the whole thing is, will it stand up to its sort of on its own pedestal? And I think, if I were to single anything out, is if you look, and Melissa, you alluded to this, there's a lot packed in here. There's a lot of story here. So if you look at the script, it pops. There's very little fat in it, if any at all. There's some in the script didn't end up on the screen. What you see on the screen is really every scene, every sort of line has a purpose, which makes this a great episode. It really sort of, everything is where it's supposed to be. The acting is top notch and what have you. And that's why we enjoy it so much. And, there's certainly more to say. And as I said, I saved that for later.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Jason M. Okun. What is in your background, by the way?
That's the poster for this episode, or at least a part of it. I couldn't put all of it up.
Get it.
That's kind of a Borgish, green, Borgish sort of background.
All right. Greg Kenzo out in Hawaii, everybody. He's Neelix and chillin'. What do you think of this episode?
I thought it was great. The only reason that I thought it might be an 8.5, it's kind of like the Lord of the Rings syndrome, where you have to grade it by all three, in this case 2. So with the next episode, I think it's gonna go even higher. Anyway, I thought, I thought this was great. This I want to point out what I said about Q Who, about them being Q. What he did was actually a benevolent act. Without the information they gained from that experience, they would have been annihilated by the Borg, like easily. And they mentioned that the Borg had already been basically sucking up these colonies on the neutrals along the neutral zone, both human and Romulan colonies. And so, yes, it was on the cusp. They were on the cusp, right? And so, yeah, there's more to Q than just playing. I mean, he is playing God, but yeah, and it's also a great story. He began the Borg story. Yeah, a great way to begin it without them getting annihilated. Anyway,
totally.
Riker stopping Shelby seemed a bit petty, given the situation. I was like, come on, Riker, you guys are going up against like this crazy enemy, and you're kind of just worried about your promotion or like someone going over your head. But then in the end, his experience shows, and it's like they flip, and it's like, Shelby becomes old Riker, and then Riker becomes Picard. When he's like, I have to make the tough decision. This is what the captain's chair is. This is, even if I have to kill my mentor, the guy I love, like, I'm going to do it, When we first are introduced to the Borg, so I'm going maybe a little long, but when we're first introduced to the Borg, you hear a choir in the background. And I thought that was really interesting because a choir is a group of voices, right? And right. Also, the Borg voice was an octave higher than normal. It was weird. Anyway, That's all I have to really say. I loved the Picard scene where he sought guidance counsel and the dialogue between them. You know, actually, I want to change my answer. I think this should. I don't know why I gave it an 8.5. I was just being contrarian. I just want it's a 9. It's a 9.
What? You're
Yeah,
just
but-
guessing what other people
Yeah, I know.
said.
We're just
You're
guessing. It's not my real. Yeah. But I should have just guessed a 9. Okay.
Mm.
Thanks.
Comment
That's it.
below as to
Yeah.
Greg's score.
Great stuff. Thanks very much, Greg, who reminds us the Borg are an acquired taste. Eve England
Oh wow!
Bloop,
Eve
bloop, bloop.
England is out in Wales. Eve, what did you think? Did you think this episode was dreary like all the others? Go ahead.
No, I mean, like Melissa, there's so much packed into this one, and I've only watched it today, so I feel like I'm still sort of thinking and mulling things over. But yeah, I just, considering some of the episodes we've seen recently have been a little bit on the dull side, I wasn't expecting this to be as good as it was. Obviously, I kind of knew what was going to happen at the end just because of what I've seen in future tracks. So it was kind of, but I didn't obviously know what was going to happen exactly. So this was really cool. And what I did like about the relationship between Shelby and Riker is, although I don't think it's really aged that well in terms of exactly how that's executed. And there is a lot of sexism there, and I don't think Riker comes across particularly as well as I think if they did it now. I think it'd be a bit more nuanced if they did it now. But I think what I really liked about the way that they did that is they had this building tension between them, and the different sort of the conflict between them. And I loved how that sort of tracked along to when they were sort of coming up to the Borg and then facing the Borg and then having to deal with the Borg. And that was there were parallels between their relationship and then how the sort of escalating tensions kind of went through the episodes. I thought that was really clever. I was exactly going to say what you said, Greg, about the choir. I thought it was really interesting that point where we first see that Borg cube and you hear the choral music was not only was it obviously just really interesting in terms of this collective voice, but just the tension and the sort of it just felt much more momentous than anything I think that we've seen before. And obviously we know the music's fantastic, but I thought the music in this episode it was a character of its own in terms of how this developed. So I thought that was just amazing. And I thought what was really interesting watching this episode today after just watching all of the stuff this week on the anniversary of D-Day was I think it just came across particularly more poignant than I think I watched it maybe last week, especially, that conversation between Picard and Guinan, and they were talking about battles. And I just thought it just sort of hit a different note to me when I was thinking, had all these thousands of men on, the coast of England waiting to go and face this potential annihilation was, I think it hit a complete different nerve to me watching it today after seeing all those stories this week. So, I really enjoyed a few niggles, but, I think overall I wasn't expecting it to be that good. It's fantastic.
Great stuff. Thanks very much. We always get so happy when Eve says, okay, this one was pretty good. I'll give you that. Great points. Thanks very much, Eve England out in Wales. Allison Leach Hyde is traveling through the southwestern United States, but she's taken a break. Tell us what she thought of this episode.
It's a great episode, and it is a great episode because it is character driven. We get to be part of Riker's thoughts and ideas of where he wants his career to go and how he wants to be promoted and how he feels about himself when he was younger, because he does see himself in Shelby and she is annoying him. So he's feeling that about himself. And so it's fun that we get to see that. I really love also that Wes got to be in the poker game now because he's an officer, and Data coaching him on how to play poker was wonderful. I thought that was so sweet. Data wants to make sure he's having a good time, but understand what's going on. So I love that. And I very much love that we got to have Crusher go on the away mission to go rescue Picard because Gates McFadden asked to get to shoot a phaser. And so Pillar went, okay, let's go. It's only a little confusing in the script because we had Troy and Shelby tell Riker he can't go on that away mission because he's the captain. And well, Dr. Crusher is the head of medical. Like, she shouldn't go either, but that's okay. I'm happy Gates got to go shoot a phaser. So that's, I thought that was pretty great. Music is wonderful. It's a great story. There's not a lot you can say that isn't really great about this episode. I mean, we've got O'Brien, we've got Guinan, we've got all the personal tension, and it's a great story. So, wonderful episode. Looking forward to doing the next one too.
Tons of great characters. Thanks very much, Allison Leach Hyde out in southwestern United States. Anil O. Palat, it's like midnight in Albania, but he's like, no Balkan state is going to keep me from the seventh rule. What did you think of this episode?
I think this is the most important episode in the entire franchise. Like, it kicks off, it takes, like you were saying, Jason, it takes Next Generation and it puts it into this different category. And we were talking about memes, Monage et Troy, right? That's the, yeah. Like, we wouldn't have all of that. It wouldn't be as popular as it is without this episode. We know that the Siskos are going to Wolf 359, so that's the beginning of the Sisko story, at least as we see it. It's a huge part of Voyager as well, and Picard. So many things happen and kick off in this episode, and it's so full of so many great things. I will say one thing, just to kind of wrap things up, is that the Riker Shelby, what I really liked at the end, because in the beginning we're on Riker's side, right? At least as the viewer, because he's our guy, and we're like, oh, who is this, outsider coming in? But I think, as you watch it over and over, you realize like Shelby's actually, she's doing what she thinks is best for the mission. And at the end, Riker, you see that as well, right? Like, he doesn't want to potentially kill Picard, but he knows that that's the best decision to make in that moment. And I think it really puts both of them in perspective. You really kind of respect both of their sides. You know what I mean? It goes from them kind of bickering to like, okay, we need to respect each other's opinions and come down and make a decision that's the best. And I think they really handled that well, especially in the end, when Riker is now captain, and you realize maybe in the beginning he wasn't always listening to what she had to say, but I think now he's really, you can kind of see him calculating. So yeah, I'll save the rest for things that's unsaid, but I don't really have anything bad to say about this episode. I think it's close to perfect.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Anil O. Palat. I found one thing bad to talk about it. We talked about it a little earlier, but Carrie Schwent will only say good things. I'll just bet, aka Crafty Bear, that is. What do you think of this episode?
Yeah, this episode is one of those, you could watch it every day from now until Kingdom Come, and it would always be awesome, always give you chills every time Riker says Mr. Worf, fire. It excels. And the analogy that came to my head the other day was, it's like water boiling. It's very, very, very slowly until all of a sudden, boom, like the bubbles are just raging, and you're looking at Picard staring at you with a laser pointer reflecting off of the screen, creating that awesome effect behind you guys. So great. A couple of awesome guest stars. You got Shelby, who Elizabeth Dennehy she's fantastic. She did such a good job with the material she was given, making you really just not like her, and you just want to defend Riker. I love her, especially separate from Star Trek. She plays in a couple episodes of the original Charmed as an elder. She's fantastic in that also. And the other guest star, the Admiral. It turns out that God got bored of being God in Star Trek V and decided to be an admiral for a little while, which, when I was looking into it, I thought was absolutely hysterical. Yeah, he is excellent. And I've got a couple things for Memory Alpha that amused me, and then we'll get to the limerick. So we've got the group. There was a group photo that was taken during the filming of the teaser, which turns out to be the last cast photo to feature Gene Roddenberry before he passed. They took this whole big group photograph that Gene is in. And it's theorized that one of the weapons that Shelby mentions that is in development was probably the Defiant, because apparently something Sisko says in the search that the plans for that had begun about 5 years prior, which would have dated it to around when this episode in the timeline, which I thought was really, really cool. And something I found that I thought was absolutely hysterical. There's an AD that mentions the rehearsal before they filmed I skipped a line. Before, when they filmed the Locutus scene, they did a rehearsal beforehand. After he says his name, he was supposed to just walk up to the camera and say the line. And instead, after he says his name, he said, "Have you ever considered buying a Pontiac?" Which apparently sent everybody in that room on the floor laughing their butts off. And I could easily, from having seen many, many bloopers, I could easily see Patrick Stewart doing that, just completely with a straight face, knowing the reaction he was going to get. Oh, and before I do the limerick, the background behind me is from a gal I met in one of the Star Trek groups. She goes by Bliss Image. She very kindly let me use her artwork as my background.
Nice.
So I promise to shout her out one more time. But I have 2 limericks that came to me just super, super quick. I will save the second one for things left unsaid. So if you're not a patron yet, sign up so you'll get to see the other one, because I think the other one is even funnier than this first one. But that's just me. But the first one comes to us from Shelby's inner monologue. I know that my place is on board this ship. Number 1 thinks all I give him is lip. But I know I belong. It's time for him to move on, because I am ready for my extra pip.
Nice. Great stuff. Thanks very much, Carrie Schwent, a.k.a. Crafty Bear. Cool shirt. The Dark Lord, Chris McGee, is here. What did you think, though, of this episode?
Hated it. No, everyone has already clip that, save it, print it. Everyone has already echoed my thoughts so well. I wish I had something profound to add. Instead, I hope you don't mind if I use my time to gush a little bit more about the episode. I'll go ahead and go on record saying that this is quite frankly the best Next Generation episode, or of course, along with its conclusion in the next season. I mean, there are possibly 1 or 2 episodes that come within a hair's breadth of taking that best of title, but not quite. I mean, you've got an action-packed story, the highest of stakes with an infallible villain, excellent acting, especially by guest star Elizabeth Dennehy, a shocking cliffhanger, and an incredibly memorable score. Not to mention, it's a long-awaited follow-up to the Borg's introduction. And Q, who, as I said, everyone has already mentioned. I've seen this episode so often, I almost had every line in it memorized once upon a time. Speaking of Q, small anecdote, this was my introduction to the Borg, as I couldn't find the Q episode on VHS until long after I had collected many later episodes, including this one. So it's kind of got a little bit backwards there. And the music, oh my goodness, Ron Jones outdoes himself with the score to this episode, and of course the next. I've listened to the soundtrack dozens of times. Even yesterday, when I re-listened to it, just listening gave me goosebumps. The memorable quote, so many to choose from. Holy cow! I'll go with the one that I like the best, which is, "You do an end run around me again, I'll snap you back so hard you'll think you're a first-year cadet again."
Yeah.
Ouch.
Okay.
Thanks very much,
Okay.
Chris McGee, the Dark Lord. All right. The Matt Boardman is here. He's got some thoughts. Let's hear him. What do you think, Matt?
So, okay. This episode was actually my introduction to the Borg because, I've said in other reviews that my first episode that I ever saw was Skin of Evil for Next Generation.
Mhm.
And then it was like very spotty that I caught a couple episodes here and there because, I mean, this was back before there was the internet to tell us when things were on and TV guide. I don't know. I was just a dumb kid, right? So I remember USA Network used to play, I forget what day it was, maybe it was Saturday, used to play like 4 hours of Next Generation episodes. And they played this one and part 2 back to back. And I just remember getting to the end of part 2 and like my mind was just blown as a teenager. I was just like, oh my gosh, I just watched Next Generation, the movie. Excuse me. Because it is very cinematic in terms of storytelling and very different from what we've gotten before, from the music. Like this whole episode is, I mean, tension. Everything is tension between characters, the buildup of the Borg. They're hiding out in that nebula. I love that moment between Guinan and Picard. Which always seems like, which is mentioned, that always seems to work out well when the two of them have those conversations, those private conversations. Like there's just some magic, and I can see why Patrick and Whoopi are friends today. Still to this day, because the two of them just have great character together, or great chemistry, not character. Anyway. I just and it's funny that Eve was talking about we're the 80th anniversary of D-Day, and every year as part of my remembrance of D-Day, I watch the miniseries Band of Brothers, and I just watched it the other night before watching this episode, and in the first episode, toward the end of the episode, they have all of these paratroopers sitting on the tarmac as they get ready to load into the planes before they head over and drop behind enemy lines. And I have to say that I felt that same tension watching, and just that anticipation of what they were about to face, dropping in behind the beaches of Normandy there to kind of knock out some of the German gun emplacements on the causeways. I felt some of that same tension as we were waiting for this build up to when the Borg, when they finally had that moment of the Borg. So anyway, I just such a great episode. And the last thing I mentioned with was yesterday's Enterprise. At the end of the Next Generation, they had done a fan poll of what were the top episodes. And yesterday's Enterprise was one of them. But the top 2 were Best of Both Worlds parts 1 and 2. So, I mean, it clearly hands down a fan favorite, and with good reason.
Mm-hmm. Great stuff. Thank you very much. The Matt Boardman. Cirroc's like, all right, so the next episode's going to be pretty good too, apparently.
Yeah.
Well, it's time for Jake's final take, everybody. Any final thoughts on this one, Cirroc?
I think it's interesting that they took the approach to put Captain Picard in such peril in the situation, because you rarely see the lead of a show kind of being put in a situation like Picard is being put in with this Borg. So I think that's a very bold move on Michael Pillar's part, and rightfully gets the audience attention. So that's a very smart move as well. I wanted to bring about a little bit about what Guinan said in that conversation with Picard in the 10 forward kind of moment there. And when she says, "We will survive as long as there are a handful of you," kind of put a lot of perspective about humanity and how we're able to adapt and overcome in certain ways. And Guinan kind of reflected upon her own people and how they were able to survive and adapt, given their own trauma and tragedy and historically. So I thought that was a very hopeful kind of thought to embed into this episode. I liked it. Also thought about the very famous line that comes out of this episode, which is resistance is futile. And I mean, I hear that everywhere all the time, and it's become like, one of the Star Trek's famous quotes.
Mm-hmm.
And ironically, I think the opposite is what this episode is actually proving, that resistance is actually fundamental to who we are and how we survive, going kind of back to what Eve was talking about in the celebration of D-Day and all of the sacrifices that were made. I think resistance is part of the human spirit. It's part of how we endure. And I think this episode proves that freedom and self-determination are some of the core things that we value, to the point of willing to sacrifice life for it. And so, I also enjoyed the kind of walking around the ship and the moment that Picard takes with, just prior to seeing Guinan, where he is doing the captain-like thing and essentially surveying the ship that he's about to go down with. It's that moment of the captain going down with the ship and him taking that all in and being real conscious of that, kind of a cerebral approach to it. This episode was definitely not a letdown. There was so much stuff in it. And then the last thing I'll say is I thought it was also really clever and interesting to hear Riker at the end of this episode, when he does take command of the Enterprise, say the very magic word that we're used to hearing Picard say all the time, which is "make it so."
Yeah.
So another clever bit of writing there from Michael Piller to just insert these kinds of things. So definitely love this episode. Can't wait to see the kind of conclusion of where it's going to go. And just one more thing about Star Trek and the world that it builds. Not having watched this episode and seeing it for the first time, hearing those words of Wolf 359 automatically put me in a frame of mind where I was like, "Oh, this is about to be serious, and this is impactful to my life." Right? I'm not even in this episode, but I already feel like it affects my life. So, kudos to the writers for great world building in Star Trek, and for giving these kinds of episodes that are gems that really talk about the human condition and what is meaningful for us all.
Mm-hmm. Great stuff as always. The second we heard Wolf 359, we're all like, "Oh boy, Deep Space Nine seed right there." That's where it all begins.
Yeah.
Thank you very much to the Matt, Chris, Carrie, Anil, Allison, Eve, Greg, Jason, Melissa, for myself, Cirroc, Lofton, Melissa Longo, and Mr. Aaron Eisenberg. Thank you all very much for hanging out with us. And until next time, always remember the seventh rule.